Animation allows filmmakers to tell stories that expand our willingness to believe the impossible. The level of detail allowed in animation lets directors have full control over every aspect of the film. Despite the complexity of this form of storytelling, animation has a reputation of being very childlike, especially to a Western audience. For this comparative film study, I will be analyzing the films Grave of the Fireflies, directed by Isao Takahata in 1988, and The Breadwinner, directed by Nora Twomey in 2017. Both are animated films that stray from Western animation conventions and embrace characteristics of war films. This study will explore the genre of animated war films through these animation auteurs' intentions. Grave of the Fireflies is a Japanese animated war drama set in 1945 and highlights that tragedy is inevitable amidst social disruption. As co-founder of world-renowned Japanese animation studio, Studio Ghibli, one might assume that a film by Takahata might be similar to those of Hayao Miyazaki, a film auteur known for blending fantasy stories about childhood, nature, and coming of age. Grave of the Fireflies' art style is very similar to that of other Ghibli films, drawing inspiration from Japanese setting and character style. The film explores the explicit suffering of 14-year-old Seita and his not-even-2-year-old sister Setsuko, as they lose their lives to injustices they face within Japan's mid-war social norms. This exploration of grief within animation continues in Nora Twomey's The Breadwinner, the story of a young Afghan girl who must assume a leadership role in her family after losing her father to the Taliban. Like Takahata, Twomey's work with Irish animation studio Cartoon Saloon has a signature animated look and feel. Art directors who worked with Twomey on previous films helped maintain her style as an animation auteur while creating a more serious tone than other Cartoon Saloon films. Both films use animation as a medium to tell stories unconventional with a Hollywood perspective on animation. Both films use a child's perspective to emphasize the impact of social disruption on lives. This creates a sense of innocence when telling the story, and the film becomes more relatable for the audience. The emotional impact of Seita and Parvana's suffering is not particular to one target audience. Even those unfamiliar with the historical events of both films experience an emotional reaction and can understand both stories through the lens of universal suffering. The perspective of a child also allows for a seemingly untouched view on social issues. In Grave of the Fireflies, Setsuko is seemingly oblivious to the causes and effects of the war. Unlike his wide-eyed sister, Seita suffers from blind patriotism. Throughout the film, Seita often has daydreams of serving in the military, proud of his father who serves in the Japanese Navy. These sequences are accompanied by close-up shots that signify the action is only in Seita's head, emphasizing the childlike wonder of the film's perspective. When Seita, like others in the film, act in the name of communal ideals, he is really performing for personal gain or pleasure. His fantasy world of righteousness and revenge is a mirror to the society in which he lives. In The Breadwinner, the protagonist is also a child. Twomey tells a complicated story through the eyes of a girl with similar needs and wants to children all over the world.
Open up! I have to see my father! I have to see him! Ah!
Similarly to Grave of the Fireflies, The Breadwinner gives the viewer an inside look to the family life of Parvana, furthering a relationship with the protagonist. The shared meal, comforting a younger brother, and bickering with an older sister allows for a similar sense of innocence. Despite the cultural difference between the Western audience and production studio and the Afghan setting of origin, having a young protagonist connects a broad range of audience members. With the goal of the film being to raise awareness about struggles of women in Afghanistan, Twomey highlights ways in which the audience can have empathy for the characters. By showing close-ups of expressions and creating symbolism for a character's struggle, Parvana's story can resonate with viewers on a deeply personal level. War films aim to highlight the intense emotion and experiences that people face during times of conflict. They look closely at violence, relationships between soldiers, social factors leading to war, and the consequences. In both Grave of the Fireflies and The Breadwinner, Takahata and Twomey use war film conventions to emphasize the consequences of war, both physically and socially. Common elements of war films include action sequences, visual realism, historical context, patriotism, themes of resilience, anti-war themes, civilian perspectives, and post-war consequences. Unlike Grave of the Fireflies, which rarely uses action scenes, The Breadwinner has more traditional action shots, such as Parvana running and scenes of violence and battle. Both of the chosen films take place during historical conflicts, with Grave of the Fireflies during the end of World War II, and The Breadwinner set in the early 2000s under Taliban control. While Parvana resists against mandatory rule that women cannot provide for their family, Seita resists against the natural consequences of war within his society. Similarly, both characters share meals, framed in the center with a balanced mise-en-scène, displaying a sense of harmony within the family dynamic. Unfortunately, this dynamic is eventually disrupted as a result of war. In seeing the main characters hurt or in distress, the audience realizes the negative impacts of war. Grave of the Fireflies and The Breadwinner directly critique the political movements behind the conflict and portray violence in a negative light by highlighting the horrors of war. When Seita puts on a firefly light show for his sister, close-up shots are used to show the emotion and childlike wonder at the common insects. The only light source in the cave are the fireflies, which illuminate the siblings' faces from different angles. Icons such as the pot of fireflies are shown in the center, as well as other props of importance throughout the film. A close-up shot from below gives the audience a direct look into Setsuko's eyes, giving the impression into what she is thinking. This expression of joy is then followed by the framing of the siblings within their cave. This setting has a double meaning, however, as it references Japanese hillside tombs. Moments of solace amongst chaos are common within the war films to show camaraderie between characters. Although the animation style uses stylized character designs, the film depicts very real scenarios. This scene with the fireflies, however, shows Seita's fantasy. His dreams of the Navy parade link back to the idea of Japanese nationalism affecting youth. A similar scene in The Breadwinner serves the same purpose as the firefly light show in Grave of the Fireflies. Parvana and another girl pretending to be a boy, Shazia, hide from members of the Taliban after being discovered as girls. They take shelter in a cave on the side of a hill, not unlike the shelter from Grave of the Fireflies. Prolonged shots of the setting orient the viewer and slow the pace of the film after the action scene. The audience is then given a view into the cave. A bird's-eye view shot of the two girls shows them resting after the action. As the girls speak, the camera slowly zooms in. This mimics the closeness that the audience gains to the protagonists as they reveal more about their background.
I lost the shoe.
I lost my cap, although I think it's outside.
Why did you hit him?
When they took my father, he was one of them.
As their characters develop, the audience gets emotionally and physically closer to them through the camera. Similar to the lighting of the Grave of the Fireflies, a single light source coming from outside the cave adds low-key lighting to the characters' faces. Like Seita comforting Setsuko, Parvana entertains Shazia with a story of a brave hero.
Tell me more about the boy.
What boy?
The story boy.
The visuals shift to a more fantastical style, and the audience is transported into the minds of the young girls. Both films have heavy influence from their country of origin, but while Grave of the Fireflies seeks to represent Japanese culture from a Japanese perspective, The Breadwinner represents Afghan culture from an Irish perspective. Grave of the Fireflies, although created after World War II, takes inspiration from neo-realist films, a cinematic movement seeking to portray events realistically. These films are often centered around stories of poor and working-class characters, in this case, siblings Seita and Setsuko. The frequent use of silent and long shots tells Seita and Setsuko's tragic story not as melodrama, but simply, directly, in the neo-realist tradition. This association to a film movement is further shown in establishing shots that allow the audience to both orient themselves to the protagonist's new location and examine the detail within these complex frames. Seita and Setsuko are often shown in private situations, another aspect of neo-realism that allows for an emotional connection with the audience. Aside from the inspiration from mid-war films, Takahata also draws inspiration from film conventions common in Japanese culture. Pillow words are figures of speech used within Japanese poetry to create meaning. These words are similar to Western use of punctuation, but emphasize feeling or rhythm. Takahata uses pillow shots within Grave of the Fireflies to create a kind of poetry. There are moments of quick action, as when the bombs rain down and terrified people fill the streets. But this film doesn't exploit action. It meditates on its consequences. This shocking ending is foreshadowed in the beginning of the film. This is accompanied by a red glow from fireflies. But the short life of these insects and frailty to their environment represents the young lives lost at war. However, many of these lives were not lost to direct combat, but the environment the war caused. Contrasting the cultural authenticity of Takahata's film, The Breadwinner integrates more elements of Western storytelling culture. The film uses imagery that negatively represents certain characters. All violent or antagonistic characters in the film are men, and their character designs are often based on rougher shapes. Simply put, characters with body types based on organic shapes like circles and curves often have soft, delicate-looking frame. These include the protagonists of The Breadwinner and many of the women characters. Squares and triangles, however, represent stronger, more menacing body types. In using harsher character designs for men, the director portrays Afghan men in a violent light. This not only contributes to Islamophobic Western ideals, but also creates a version of Afghanistan that is highly negative. Western shape imagery is also used in the form of common Irish and pre-Christian circular symbols. This symbol can represent harmony, cycle, and balance. In Parvana's case, the circle represents her continuous, never-ending struggle against the systemic violence she faces in her society. It also alludes to the ending, in which Parvana's story does not finish. This emphasizes the uncertainty people within wartime situations face about the outcomes of their lives. The exploration of the animated war film defies a common perception of animation as a genre solely for children's entertainment. Instead, they use animation as a powerful medium to examine the human condition during the horrors of war, particularly through the perspective of child protagonists, and to both captivate captivate an audience and portray reality, but also enhance the unreal aspects of the perspectives of children. These films serve as a social commentary on violent conflicts, showing the life-changing consequences of societal disruption and serving as a reminder that endings are not always hopeful.